Hello, everyone. I hope you're enjoying your summer break. Today, I'll be reading chapters 36 through 39 of Maniac, Magee. The deal was, if Russell and Piper went to school for the rest of the week, Maniac would show them the shortcut to Mexico on Saturday. He figured if they all managed to survive till then, he'd come up with something. On Saturday, the boys had their paper bag packed, and Maniac had a new deal. Go to school for another week, and he'd treat them to another large pizza. Besides, he said, crossing his fingers, this was volcano season down in Mexico. The whole place was a sheet of red-hot lava. Better wait till it cools down. They bought it, and they bought the same deal the following week. But school was still agony for the boys. It had to be worth more than a pizza a week. But what? The brothers thought and thought about it, and soon began to realize that the answer was sleeping between them every night. Ever since the famous Maniac Magee had showed up at their house, Russell and Piper McNabb had become famous in their own right. Other kids were always crowding around, pelting them with questions. What's he like? What's he say? What's he do? Did he really sit on Fitzwalter's front steps? Is he really that fast? Kids started giving them knots, sneaker laces, yo-yo strings, toys, and saying, "Ask Maniac to undo this, will you?" Really little kids referred to him as Mr. Maniac. The McNabbs ate it up. In the streets, the playground, school, the attention, not the pizza, was the real reason they put up with school each day. They began to feel something they had never felt before. They began to feel important. What a wonderful thing, this importance. Waiting from them the moment they awoke in the morning, pumping them up like basketballs, giving them bounce. And they hadn't even had to steal it. They loved it. The more they had, the more they wanted. And so when Maniac tried to cut the next pizza for school deal, Russell answered, "No." "No," echoed Maniac, who had been afraid it would come to this. "No," said Russell. "We want something else." "Oh," said Maniac. "What's that?" They told him if he wanted another week's worth of school out of them, he would have to enter Fitzwald's backyard and stay there for 10 minutes, screeched Piper, who shuddered at the very thought. When Maniac casually answered, "Okay." "It's a deal." Piper ran shrieking from the house. On the next Saturday morning, Russell, Piper, and Maniac set out for Fitzgerald's house, about 7 blocks away. They took the alleys. Along the way, they were joined by other kids who were waiting, their eyes at once fearful and excited. By the time they got to the Fitzgerald's backyard, at least 15 kids huddled against the garage door on the far side of the alley. Maniac didn't hesitate. He walked straight up to the back gate, opened it, and went in. Not only that, he went all the way to the center of the yard, turned, folded his arms, smiled, and called, "Who's keeping time?" Russell, his throat too dry to speak, raised his hand. For 10 minutes, 15 kids and possibly the universe held their breath. The only sounds were inside their heads, the moaning and wailing of the ghosts of all the poor slobs who had ever blundered onto Fitzgerald's property. To the uttermost amazement of all, when Russell finally croaked, "Time!" Maniac was still there, alive, smiling, apparently unharmed. Even more amazing, he didn't come out. Instead, he said, "Say, you guys, how about adding to the deal? If I do something else while I'm here, will you make it the next 2 weeks of school?" "What are you going to do?" stammered Russell. Maniac thought for a minute, then announced brightly, "I'll knock on the front door." 5 kids Fitzgerald on the spot. Several others screamed, "No, don't!" Piper went into some sort of fit and began kicking the garage door. Russell zoned out. Maniac took all of this to signify a deal. He hopped the backyard fence and strode around front. The others went back down the alley and around the long way. They stationed themselves not only across the street, but almost halfway up the block, and even then, they squeezed together in a bunch, as though if they allowed any space between them, Fitzgerald might somehow pick them off, one by one. They huddled, trembling, to bear witness to the last seconds of Maniac Magee's life. They saw him stand directly in front of the red brick 3-story house, the ball green window shades. They saw him climb the 3 cement steps to the white door, the portal of death. They saw him raise his hand, and though they were too far away to hear, they saw him knock upon the door. And 15 hearts beat in time to that silent knocking. The door opened. Finsterwald's door opened. Not much, but enough so the witness could make out a thin strip of blackness. Would Maniac be sucked into that black hole like so much lint into a vacuum cleaner? Would Finsterwald's long, bony hand dart out, quick as a lizard's tongue, and snatch poor Maniac? Maniac appeared to be speaking to the dark crack. Was he pleading for his life? Would his last words be skewered like a marshmallow by Finsterwald's dagger-tipped cane? Apparently not. The door closed. Maniac bounded down the steps and came jogging toward them, grinning. 3 kids bolted, sure he was a ghost. The others stayed. They invented excuses to touch him to see if he was still himself, still warm. But they weren't positively certain until later, when they watched him devour a pack of butterscotch crimpets. Chapter 37. Thus began a series of heroic fears by Maniac Magee. At 20 paces, he hit a telephone pole with a stone 61 times in a row. When the once-a-week freight train hit Elm Street, he started running from the Oriole Street dead end on one rail and beat the train to the park. No sweat. He took off his sneaks and socks and walked, nonchalant as you please, through the rat-infested dump at the foot of Raco Hill. The mysterious hole down by the creek, the one you would never reach into, even if you dropped your most valuable possession into it. He stuck his hand in, his arm in, all the way to the elbow, kept it there for the longest 60 seconds on record, and pulled it out, dirty but still full of fingers. He climbed the fence at the American Bison Pen at the zoo. He had suggested this feat himself. Everyone else scoffing. And while the mother looked on, kissed the baby buffalo. So I went through February and March of that year, a feat a week. To much of the town, hearing about these things, it was simply a case of the legend adding to itself, doing what legends do. To Russell and Piper McNabb, it was a case of boosting their importance ever higher in the eyes of the other kids. Was it not at the brothers' direction that Maniac performed these deeds? And who, after all, is the more amazing, the lion or the tamer? As for Maniac, he understood early on that he was being used for the greater glory of Piper and Russell. He also understood that without him, they would not be going to school every day. For the McNabbs, there was nothing free about public education. A tuition had to be paid. Every week, Maniac paid it. And besides, he loved to meet the challenges they cooked up for him. And then one day, they gave him the most perilous challenge of all. They dared him to go into the East End. Chapter 38. The waitresses there were twice 15 this time. Went with him as far as Hector Street. They halted at the curb. He crossed the street and went on alone. Piper megaphoned after him. "Maniac, come back. We was just kidding. You don't have to." Maniac just waved and went on. He knew he should be feeling afraid of these East Enders, those so-called black people, but he wasn't. It was himself he was afraid of any trouble he might cause just by being there. It was the day of the worms, the first almost warm after the rainy night day in April, when you bolt from your house to find yourself in a world of worms. They were as numerous here in the East End as they had been in the West, the sidewalks, the streets, the very places where they didn't belong. Forlorn, marooned on concrete and asphalt, no place to burrow. April's orphans. Once when he was little in Hollidaysburg, he had gone along with his toy wheelbarrow, carefully lifting them with a barreled kitchen fork until the barrel was full, then dumped them into Mr. Snavely's compost pile. And sure as the worms followed the rain, the kids followed the worms. West End, East End. They had poured from their houses onto the cool, damp sidewalks. And if they gave the worms any notice, it was only when they squashed one underfoot. And so, as Maniac moved through the East End, he felt the presence of not one but 2 populations. both occupying the same territory. Yet each unmindful of the other, one yelping and playing and chasing and laughing, the other lost and silent and dying by the millions. "Yo, fish belly!" Maniac snapped too. He glanced at a street sign. He was 4 blocks from Hector, deep in the east. Mars Bar came dip-jiving toward him. Taller than before, bigger but still scowling. "Hey, fish! Thought you was gone!" Maniac turned to face him fully. Mars Bar did not stop till he was inside Maniac's phone booth of space, inches from his face. They locked eyes levelly. Maniac thinking, I must be growing too. He said, "I'm back." The scowl fiercened. "Maybe nobody told you I'm badder than ever. I'm getting badder every day. I'm almost afraid to wake up in the morning." He leaned in closer. "'Cause of how bad I might gotta get overnight." Maniac smiled, nodded. "Yeah, you're bad, Mars Bar." He gave a sniff. His smile went a little smirky. "And I'm getting so bad myself, I think I must be half black." Mars' eyes bulged. He backed off. The scowl collapsed and he howled with laughter. His buddies who were hanging back stared dumbly. As Mars unwound from his laughing fit, he studied Maniac up and down, aware too that Maniac was studying him. When he could speak again, he said, "Still them raggedy clothes, huh, fish?" He lifted one foot pose. "I seen you looking like them kicks. Just got 'em." Maniac nodded. "Nice." They were more than nice. They were beautiful. The best. Yes, the baddest sneaks he had ever seen. Way better than anything Grayson could have afforded. "I forgot to tell you something else too, fish." "What's that?" I'm faster. I've been working out. Got my new boss kicks." He sprinted in place, arms and legs pistoning to a blur. He stopped. He jabbed a finger at Maniac's nose, pressed it, flattening the soft end of it. "See? Guess you were right. Now at least you got a black nose." He laughed. They both laughed. Everybody laughed. Then Mars turned scowly again, saying, "But you ain't black enough or bad enough to beat the Mars man. We gonna race, honky donkey?" The race was seen up on Plum Street, the long level block between Ash and Jackson. By the time they were ready, half the kids in the East End were there. From the tiniest pipsqueaks to high schoolers, the little kids ran races of their own from curb to curb. The bigger kids shouldered blasters and dug into their jeans for coins to bet with. For the first time since last fall, mothers opened windows and leaned out from second stories. Traffic was detoured from both ends of the block. No one could find string for the finish, so a second-story mother dropped down a spool of bright pink thread. Another problem was the start. First, they had to find chalk to draw the starting line. When they did, nobody could seem to draw it straight. The result? A stack of starting lines creeping up the street till someone brought out a yardstick and did it straight. The next problem came when the starter, Bump Gilliman, who was also Mars Bar's best pal, called, "Get ready!" And someone in the crowd yelled, "That ain't what you say. You say, take your mark." Well, everybody jumped into it. Then there was shoving and jawing and almost a fist fight over the proper way to start a race. Finally, there was a compromise, and Bump called, "Get ready, on your mark." At which point someone else called, "Go Mars!" And Bump turned and snarled, "Shut up!" When the starter starts, there was no noise. So naturally, someone else called, "Smoke 'em, Mars!" And then came, "Waste 'em, Mars! And do the honk, bar man!" And they might still be calling this to this day had not a single voice separated itself from the others. "Burn 'em, Magee!" It was hands down, laughing and pointing from his porch on the roof of a car. Bump jumped into the let up. "Get set, go." And as long last, mossy from their weight at the starting line, they went. Even as the race began, even after it began, Maniac wasn't sure how to run it. Naturally, he wanted to win, or at least to do his best. All his instincts told him that. But there were other considerations. Whom he was racing against, and where, and what the consequences might be if he won. There were heavy considerations, heavy enough to slow him down, and to the historical crowd and the sight of Mars Bar's sneaker bottoms and the boiling of his blood ignited his afterburners, and before you could say, "Burn him, Magee," he was ahead, the pink thread bobbing in his sights. But he never saw his body break the thread. He saw only the face of Mars Bar, straining, gasping, unbelievingly losing. They went crazy. They went wild. They went totally bananas. You see him? He turned around. He ran backwards. He did it backwards. He beat him going backwards. Mars Bar tried. He shoved Bump. You started too fast. I wasn't ready. He shoved the thread holders. You moved him up so he could win. I was gaining on him. He shoved Maniac. You bumped me. You got a false start. You cheated. But his protest drowned in the pandemonium. Why did I do it? Was all Maniac could think. He hadn't even realized it till he crossed the line, and he regretted it instantly. Wasn't it enough just to win? Did he have to disgrace his opponent as well? Had he done it deliberately to pay back Mars Bar for all of his nastiness? To show him up and shut him once and for all? His only recollection was a feeling of sheet joyful exuberance, himself in celebration, shouting "Amen" in the Bethany church, bashing John McNabb's fastballs out of sight, dancing the polka with Grayson. Maybe it was that simple. After all, who asked why others toboggan down mud banks? But that didn't make it any less stupid or rotten a thing to do. The hatred in Mars Bar's eyes was no longer for a white kid in the East End. It was for Jeffrey Magee, period. The crowd surged with him as he made his way westward. It wasn't clear whether they were glad or not that he had won, only that they had seen something to set them off. They jostled and jammed and high-fived and jibed. For everyone who called him White Lightning, two more challenged him to race. Right here, baby, you and me. See who gonna turn his back on who? Maniac kept moving, embarrassed, wishing he could just break out and sprint for the West End, wishing he could duck into the Bill's house and be sanctioned there and not fear reprisals on them. And just about then, miraculously, two little hands were warming into his, two familiar voices squealing, "Maniac! Maniac!" Hester and Lester! He snatched them up, one in each arm. He was on Sycamore Street. There was the house, the door opening, Amanda, Mrs. Bill smiling to beat the band. Chapter 39. During the night, March doubled back and grabbed April by the scruff of the neck and flung it another week or two down the road. When Maniac slipped silently from house at dawn, the only way he'd ever managed to get away, March pounced with cold and nasty paws. But Maniac wasn't minding. The reunion had been ecstatic and tearful and nonstop happy. And inside he was pure July. He was half a block up Sycamore before he stopped tiptoeing. Minutes later, he crossed Hector. The streets were dry. An occasional scrap of chewed rawhide was all that remained of the worms. Hours later, Russell and Piper spotted him 3 blocks off. "Maniac, you're alive? We thought they got you. We thought they slit your throat. We thought they strangled you and pulled your tongue out. We thought they chopped your head off and boiled you. Yeah, boiled you and drunk your blood. Yeah, and drunk your brains. Yeah, don't drink brains, you moron meatball. Yeah, you do. Brains are like milkshakes, like Dairy Queen. You can drink them with a straw. You can hear them sloshing if you shake your head hard enough. Listen. Hey, get off my head. Hey, help!" They were off and running. Maniac couldn't help laughing. In spite of their twisted, ludicrous impressions of EastEnders, the concern and the tears in their eyes had been genuine. They had really missed him. They had really been afraid for him. 2 houses away, he could hear the thump, almost feel it, and Father George McNabb's voice. "Lay 'em down easy, I said. Easy," followed by son John. "This easy enough?" Thump, followed by a string of curses from George McNabb that fried the cold morning like an egg. The living room was hazy with dust. At the back end of the dining room, they were bringing in the cinder blocks. George and John had and a handful of cobras. lugging and grunting them in the floor from the backyard and dumping them onto the floor. Thump, thump. Hey, kid, George McNabb was pointing through the haze. 3 months, and he still didn't know his tenant's name. Get ye Lily Hyde over here. Start lugging these. Maniac waved. Later, gotta go. He shut the door and headed up the street. So they were really doing it. He had heard them planning it for weeks. Making drawings. Buying or stealing cement, towels, a level. A pillbox, they called it. Once it was done, they'd be ready. Let the revolt begin. Let the rebels, as they called the East Enders, come. Let them bust through the newly installed bars over the plywood on the window. Let them bust through the steel door. They'll find themselves staring down the barrel of a little surprise. They squabbled over what the surprise should be. Uzi? AK-4? Bazooka? Why? Maniac had asked Giant John one day. Why what? Why are you doing all this? To get ready. What else? Well, what do you think's going to happen? What's going to happen? Giant John swatted a squad of roaches from the kitchen table and sat down. What's going to happen is one of these days they're going to revolt. Who says? Who cares who says? You think they're going to make an announcement? Maniac tried to picture Amanda and Hester and Lester and Bow Wow storming the barricades. When's all this supposed to happen? John shrugged. You never know. Maybe this summer. He jumped up, grabbed a beer from the fridge, flipped it open. They like to revolt in the summer, makes them itchy. They like to overrun the cities. This time we'll be ready. And he told Maniac what he often imagined lying in bed. The blacks sweeping across Hector one streaming summer night. Torches, chains, blades, guns, war cries, maundering, looting, overrunning the West End. Climbing in through smashed windows, doors, looking for whites, bloodthirsty for whites, like Indians in the old days. Indians on a raid. That's what they are. Giant John nodded thoughtfully. Today's Indians. The cockroach strolling up his pant leg wasn't the only thing making Maniac feel crawly. He shook off the roach. He moved to the center of the kitchen to surround himself with as much space as possible. But other people, he said, I don't hear them talking about revolts. Nobody else wants to make a pillbox. Giant John tilted the last of the beer into his mouth. Maybe when we do, he grinned, they will. That had been weeks before, and now the pillbox was underway. No longer an ideal in the backyard, but a reality in the dining room. Now there was no room that Maniac could stand in the middle of and feel clean. Now there was something else in that house, and it smelled worse than garbage and turds. That is the end of chapters 36 through 39. If you listen to the story, please let me know what you think Maniac means when he says at the end of chapter 39. Now there was something else in that house, and it smelled worse than garbage and turds.